Okay, so.
Hello, testing. Oka, miigwech. Tansa, Buju, Anin, Ryan Beardy and Dijnakash, Obaskadang, Nindunji. My name is Ryan Beardy and I'll be your MC for this evening. On behalf of the AMC, I would like to send a warm welcome to everyone who's gathered here for our town hall. That was the Spirit Sands drum group. Once again, let's have a round of applause for the Spirit Sands drum group. At this moment, I'd like to invite the AMC Culture Advisor, Perry Francois, to begin the evening in a good way with a prayer.
Bonjour, dancer. All stand up. Na hiyo na nas kuma na pira itimiga na hiyo ta tragis moan. Uma bi mamo ya trawi kiski tamagi on hawi tahamigis ya. Ako na nas kuma. Ay kasi man ito na nas kuma ano sa skip match ya kay mida tatato rap ya tawasko ya. Kaya ako naman no sa hipi pagusit mga ya tawichi ya. Takitamagi tayo, takitamagi na ya ni gani. Hutia tis na ko ma. Kitamagi tayo nan, kitamagi na nan. Igagi onski, tamagagi onsto tama. Kami na kitap meg wagu magan takwisto. Unigi go ho chas misa kami na usme a tagi kiskisik. Igon na tatawis tamaya ko aktawichi haya ko na nas ko manimidigis kan siya kap mahamigis ya nas ko batin igasa.
Let's have a round of applause for Perry. For those of you just arriving, I'm Ryan Beardy and I'm honored to be your MC this evening. Once again, I'd like to thank Spirit Sands Drum Group, Perry Francois, for opening this evening with a good prayer. I'd like to acknowledge everybody here for traveling here near and far for tonight's event. I want to acknowledge the chiefs in attendance and the political parties that took part in the march, as well as the ones who attended here tonight. I want to thank all Manitobans who have gathered here to show their support as well. Kichimigwech. I'd like to remind once again everybody that this is live streamed on the AMC Facebook page. So before proceeding, I would like to read out the photography and videography disclaimer. Photographs and film may be taken during this event, which may or may not include your recognizable image or video. By participating in this event, you consent to be photographed or filmed. An authorized organizer to use the photographs or film in print, digital, video, web-based format for promotional archival use. For further information, contact AMC at andrew@manitobachiefs.com. I'd like to also encourage the viewers out there to share this page, share this live feed so that this message may be more effective and broadcast across the province. The Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs would like to recognize Indigenous candidates in the provincial election. 3 Indigenous candidates have responded to our invitation to be here tonight. At this point, I'd like to give them 3 minutes to introduce themselves and speak. Let's start with Bernadette Smith. Bernadette Smith is a Canadian First Nations politician who was elected to the Legislative Assembly of Manitoba in a by-election on June 13, 2017. She represents the electoral district of Point Douglas as a member of the Manitoba New Democratic Party. So I ask, Bernadette, hi.
Hi.
How will you be addressing First Nations concerns if re-elected?
Good evening, everyone. Bonjour, Anin, Tanse, Ginui Quinn, Indigenakas, Makododam, Winnipeg, Takbay, Nandunji. Well, I want to start by just acknowledging AMC for putting on this event. Super important. I've been knocking doors, talking to our First Nation people, and a lot of them have been saying that they don't vote. And I've been encouraging them to vote because we can make a difference as First Nation people. We can change what's happening in Manitoba starting with the relationship with First Nations. You've heard our leader, Wab Kinew, talk about, changing that relationships in terms of having First Nations be a partner in this province. We've seen this government, the Pallister government, continually undermine what First Nations are doing in this province. We've heard him refer to them as special interest groups, and that's simply not the relationship that we as the NDP party want to have with Indigenous people. I myself am an Indigenous woman, and that's super important for me to have a voice. I was on the outside, lobbying for change. And I got involved in politics, and people were saying to me, that's not our way as First Nation people. We should be, having our own government. And I was like, yes, we need our own government, but right now I need to be at that table to make some of those decisions. So that's why I got involved in politics, because I wasn't happy with what was going on, especially with murdered and missing. A lot of you know that my sister is missing. And I wanted to make change, and since I've been elected, I've been fighting for change for our people, been standing up against this Pallister government, and we've made a lot of commitments to First Nation people. First of all, around our kids. I've been fighting for our kids and saying that, First Nations should be governing their own kids. We would put together a cabinet committee where we'd work alongside First Nation communities to govern their own kids. Our kids should be raised in their own communities. I was raised in Winnipeg. We also have a lot of First Nations and Indigenous and Métis and Inuit that are living in our city that also need support. And instead of taking our kids away, what we should be doing is putting those supports into the homes where the families need them the most. We also committed to taking the 231 recommendations from the Missing and Murdered Inquiry report. And WAB committed to Nahani and I leading those recommendations and looking at ones that could be put into place right away, pushing for the federal government to make change so that us as Indigenous people aren't 4 times or 5 times more likely to walk out our door and be missing. I have kids, I have granddaughters, and I fear for them when they go outside the house. I fear for myself, like walking on the street, and that shouldn't have to happen. So if I'm reelected, those are some of the things I'm going to work on and I'm going to push hard for. And I'm not afraid. I'm a North Ender. I've been called out many times in the house, and I'm surprised I haven't been kicked out yet because I heckle bad, but you know what? I stand up for people. I stand up for what I believe in. And if I'm reelected, I'll continue to stand up for our people. So miigwech.
Thank you, Bernadette. Now let's speak to Nahani Fontaine. Nahani is status Ojibwe from Saging Anishinaabe First Nation in southern Manitoba. She is the current MLA for St. John's and also House Leader, critic for justice, missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, status of women, LGBTQ issues, military and veteran affairs. So, Nahani, how will you be addressing First Nation concerns if elected?
So, Anine, everyone, first and foremost, I just want to acknowledge AMC for putting on a very important event in an attempt to engage our community. It's so important that Indigenous peoples from across the province are engaged in the political process. Now, Bernadette touched on it a little bit in respect of there's kind of 2 thoughts within our communities. One, this isn't our system, and so therefore, why would we participate in it? Or the opposite, that it is in our system, but we need our people to be able to participate and be at those tables. You know, for me, I'm just going to keep my comments particularly in respect of women, and I know that's probably not a surprise for most people, but I don't know if people know that actually the first Indigenous woman ever elected to the Manitoba legislature was our NDP sister, Amanda Laughlin, the daughter of Oscar Laughlin. She was elected in April of 2015. Imagine that was how long it took to have an Indigenous woman, a First Nation status woman, elected to the Manitoba legislature. And yet the legislature is meant to represent all of us, but that voice was missing for so long. I'm so proud, and the issue is this, is that representation in politics absolutely matters. So I'm so proud that I'm a part of a team that includes Bernadette Smith and Amanda Laughlin and the first woman of color, Flor Marcelino, who was elected. I'm proud to be a part of that team because we need women to be elected. We need Indigenous women to be elected. We need Black women to be elected. We need Muslim women to be elected. If those voices are not in the Manitoba legislature, who brings those to the legislature? When we debate bills, when we introduce bills, and when we're fighting against egregious legislation and policy from the government. If we're not there, who's going to fight on our behalf? Who's going to voice those concerns? Bernadette and I have been in the House debating about the sexual exploitation of children in Manitoba. Children as young as 4 and 5 who are exploited. We've had the opportunity to talk about missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. Together, we've been able to have a bill, a private member's bill, that is law recognizing and honoring Indigenous women and girls. I'm proud of that work, and I really do encourage our people to get involved in politics. Our people's vote can literally flip an election. And so I really encourage each and every one of you to get involved in elections by volunteering, by sitting on executive boards, by putting your name forward to run. So I say miigwech. Thank you.
I'd like to ask Bernadette to grab her gift. I forgot. Thank you, Nahani. Now let's speak to Ken Henry. Ken Henry is running in the electoral district of Borderland for the Green Party of Manitoba. Ken Henry is from Roseau River Anishinaabe First Nation, was elected as chief and served 2 terms in this capacity. Thank you. So I ask you, Ken, how will you be addressing First Nation concerns if elected?
Thank you very much. I want to start by saying thanks. It was it was awesome to participate in this. I'm First Nation and I vote, and talking to other members of different parties. And I think it's really important to keep in mind that even if we don't share the same colors that parties often wear, doesn't mean we can't do things together. We can't make changes together, because sometimes there's a lot of really good things that some of the parties put forward. But having said that, I am looking to get into the Borderland area, and of course I was chief in that area, so we all know that it's a conservative stronghold. So really I'm going in there hoping that a lot of what I've accomplished as chief during the 2 terms that I served over there holds some value to the communities, because anytime I ever visited any of the other communities, they really treated me with respect, almost in awe. So I'm hoping those types of things come forward, and I'm looking forward to do those types of things, because you know what, when you're in this position and you have the ability to change certain things, you should do that. And you don't really need a pedestal to change things, but it helps. It helps to get into these types of things. So I'm glad that the Green Party has accepted me and is encouraging me to run in Borderlands because it's something that I've always wanted to do. It was an honor to be chief. Don't get me wrong. It was such an honor. You know what? And it was good to get out. So I'm very aware of all the issues that are out there. And I'm looking forward to talking to a lot of the constituents. I know that Roseau River is in Borderland, so I'm going to go home first and start there, and then hopefully we can start getting people to the other communities because, as I said, maybe I was treated really well in these communities, but I don't always hear that from everybody else in my community where they have experienced racism, experienced hostilities from the different communities. So I'm hoping that we can change some of those types of things and that really it's something I'm looking forward to. You'll have to forgive me. I didn't know that I was going to be able to speak. I thought this was going to be something that the leaders were going to do and that I'd sit there looking pretty, but thank you very much. I see I have 11 seconds left, but Chimigwech, and good luck to all the candidates. I hope we all get in as First Nation people because we have so much to offer the province of Manitoba and indeed Canada. Chimigwech.
Thank you. I'd like to thank Bernadette, Nahani, and Ken on behalf of the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs and everybody present. And now, we would like to move into the main focus of the evening, the town hall with our provincial party leaders. I want to ask those watching online to quickly take a moment to reshare this live feed with those so that our message is amplified. Thank you. I would like to quickly introduce each representative here today and ask them to join the stage. Representing the Liberal Party, we have Dougald Lamont. Dougald Lamont is currently the leader of the Manitoba Liberal Party. Representing the Conservative Party, we have Eileen Clark. Eileen Clark was elected as MLA for Agassiz in 2016. She was appointed Minister of Indigenous and Municipal Relations in 2016 and now is Minister of Indigenous and Northern Relations. Representing the New Democratic Party, we have Wab Kinew. Originally from Unagaming First Nation near Kenora, Wab went to school and established his career here in Winnipeg. He lives in the city with his wife and 2 children and coaches minor league hockey in his spare time. Wab is an award-winning journalist, broadcaster, musician, literary reviewer, and best-selling author.
Fair enough, thank you.
Representing the Green Party, we have James Bedham. In 2008, James was elected as leader of the Green Party of Manitoba, and he continues in that position until this day. From 2008-2013, James balanced his Green Party leadership duties with part-time law studies and part-time employment as an environmental research consultant. James was called to the bar 2014, and in October 2017, he and Seneca Longclaws founded the firm Bedham and Longclaws Law Corporation. Let's welcome the provincial party candidates. We also have, lastly, as an independent, we have Dave Wheeler. Dave Wheeler is an award-winning 20-year veteran of the cinema, television, stage, and radio industry. He is married with 2 children and is a direct descendant of Miles McDonald. Dave is running as an independent candidate in the new riding of McPhillips, which covers West St. Paul and Garden City. Let's have a round of applause again for all the candidates. We will begin this session by providing each candidate 3 minutes to respond to the question, why should First Nations voters support your party? Let's jump right in. Dougald Lamont, in 3 minutes or less, why should First Nations support your party?
Thank you very much. I want to thank thank the AMC for putting this on and for the drum song as well as the prayer. We've set out with the goal of running a government for all Manitobans, and we're really serious about that. I've had the opportunity to travel all over the province and to see firsthand the challenges the First Nations face, including driving over ice roads, to see what it's like in fly-in communities, talk to people firsthand about the challenges with jobs, with health, and with education. And we are committed to moving beyond consultation. One of the things that a lot of people talk about, politicians will say they want to consult, but we want to work in genuine partnership with First Nations, because ultimately we're all Manitobans. I know that often when people think about relationships with the government, they talk about or think about relationships with the Crown as being the federal government only. But the other is that I've seen the impacts of First Nations on many failures of provincial policy, the issues that First Nations face in discrimination, whether it's in jobs, education, and even the fact that the province doesn't build adequate infrastructure, roads, bridges, airports, to actually provide people with the means to get in and out of their communities, the means to get lower cost food into communities. There is an enormous opportunity for First Nations in our province, and we want to work in partnership in doing that. The other is that during my leadership, I ran for leader 2 years ago, and one of the most important things I talked about was reducing the number of children in care. This is not just a political issue, it's something we should all agree on. This is one of the most important moral issues facing us as a province and as a country, that there are still over 10,000 children in care, and we need to, the first 5 recommendations of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission were all related to children in care. And this is something we have to work. It's not just a question of reforming the CFS system. It's a question of actually finding out what we have to do and implementing policies that improve jobs, that keep families together, and that and provide housing, for example, that actually make sure so that in the future we're not taking kids away from families at all. We need to make that a huge priority, and that's something we're determined to do. And fundamentally, we believe in justice, and that's something we want to see. We want to make sure that people have opportunities, equal opportunity across Manitoba, and that means that there's a lot of work to do for governments, especially to work in partnership, but also to work side by side with First Nations in improving their lives. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dougal Demont. Next, we'll have Eileen Clark. Eileen, why should First Nations voters support your party?
Well, thank you very much, and I have to say it's a distinct honor to be with you here tonight, and it's especially encouraging when I look out in the crowd and see so many young people. Typically when it's a political event, you see seniors, and this is the exact opposite. There's a lot of young people in the crowd here tonight, and I want to acknowledge you and thank you for being here, because this is your future that we're talking about. Further to that, very proud to be with you on Territory 1 tonight. That's distinctly important to me. And I'd like to acknowledge Grand Chief Arlen Dumas, who I've had a great honor working with for the past couple of years since he's been elected as well as his staff, who are many of them here. Also, although there's not a lot of elders with us tonight, but I'm grateful that this event is live streamed, because the elders are the basis of why we're doing what we're doing. They've provided their love, they provide their knowledge on a regular basis, and we have to be forever grateful for that, because that is what guides us on this journey forward. I also want to acknowledge fellow candidates. I've been in municipal politics prior to this. I'm not from Winnipeg, I'm from Gladstone, Manitoba. Small rural community, grew up in a very small community, came from a very average family, no extras, no benefits. I had to work from the time I was 12 years old. I bought my own clothes to go to school. I have no special privileges in this life. Never expected to be in politics. That was never a goal. I was in business for 33 years. I worked hard. I owned that business from the time I was 18 years old, and I had it till I was 33. After that, I was the mayor of my community, did extremely well at that, but ultimately ended up in provincial politics, a place I never expected to be. And to be appointed as Minister of Indigenous Relations in the province of Manitoba was something at the time I didn't understand. In 3 years, I've come to understand that very clearly. I have met with chiefs and councils during that time, and we have built trust, we have built respect, and we have created a foundation going forward that is going to benefit Indigenous people for years to come. It's taken a long time. 3 years is a long time, but it's a short time frame when you look at, a provincial government that's been there for almost 100 years and not advancing. So in 3 years, I feel that we've come a long ways, but there's so much further to go. And I look forward, you'll be hearing over the next week, our leader, Brian Pallister, will be putting forward initiatives that will be for the Indigenous people and for the people of Manitoba. And I think you'll be really pleased. And I look forward, very forward, to working with that campaign and inclusive completely of the Indigenous people in Manitoba. Thank you.
Thank you, Eileen Clark. Now we have Wab Canoe. Wab Canoe, why should First Nations voters support your party?
Bonjour, how do you do? I'm Wab Canoe. On September 10th, I will be running against Brian Pallister to become the next Premier of Manitoba. There's three main areas that I want to focus on in this campaign, and they are reasons that I think people should vote for our team. You heard from some of our excellent team members earlier tonight, Nahanni Fontaine, Bernadette Smith. I also want to acknowledge Robert Jessup, who's our candidate for Steinbach. If he gets elected, we're definitely forming government in Steinbach, so good luck, Robert. Great guy, super funny. So the three main issues that I want to focus on are healthcare, jobs, and solving the climate crisis while keeping life affordable in Manitoba. So on healthcare, we know that healthcare is so important to your family when you're welcoming a baby, and also at the end of your life's journey, when you're going to journey to the spirit world. And throughout it all, we need healthcare that is going to be there for you, that is going to be good quality, that's going to be accessible, and that will treat you with dignity. We know over the past few years there have been many cuts to healthcare, and certainly we want to repair some of the damage that Mr. Pallister has caused to healthcare. But our vision for health is much stronger than just undoing some of those mistakes. It's also about building a system that focuses on prevention and keeping people healthy at home in the community. Diet, exercise, nutrition, injury prevention, we do all that. So many of our young people will be able to flourish, and the elders will be able to live long into old age and teach us all their knowledge and the languages as well. The second major issue I want to focus on is creating good jobs. More than 50,000 good jobs over 4 years across the province. It's been my life's experience that part of turning my life onto a positive foot was having a good paying job so I could provide for my family. But it goes beyond just a paycheck. Having a good job is also about the pride, the dignity, and the self-respect that comes with putting in a hard day's work. And I want every single person in Manitoba to feel that. I want everyone who wants to find work to be able to find work in our province. And finally, many of us see ourselves as water protectors or as water carriers. And I will bring that in this very building. When I was chosen as leader, before I walked onto the stage, my wife carried the pail of water and she poured the water out for us. And if I have the great privilege of serving as Premier, I will bring that mentality into the Premier's office to ensure that we solve the climate crisis while still keeping life affordable, because many people in this province have to drive hundreds of kilometers in a pickup truck just to go to Walmart, and we can't leave them behind. So these are some of the issues that I want to focus on. Migochka bizindiao kapuchin jiken dam pija eko ma ni bega megong shigura shano kiwi ga megong igie.
Thank you, Wab Canoe. Now we'll have James Bedham. James Bedham, why should First Nations voters support your party?
Well, first, thank you very much for having me here. I
first want to thank the Spirit Sands drummers. I also want to thank Perry Francoise for the prayer and the opening today. I want to acknowledge that we are standing here on Treaty 1 territory, and I think that's important to recognize because we're 150 years out of that, and we still have not delivered all the land that's promised. We still have not lived up to the Treaty Land Entitlement Agreement. We're not there yet, and I think it's important to recognize that because we need to recognize First Nations as the original nations of this country and need a nation-to-nation relationship where we're working with First Nations. And for me, that's really important. I was privileged enough as a lawyer to work with Indigenous peoples and to learn from them. I'm not saying I have all the answers, but it certainly has been enlightening for me coming from the settler side of the population, and ultimately the benefits of having a more harmonious relationship benefit us both, and I think more so on the other side. In terms of what the Greens want to do, there's a few issues that we want to focus on: reducing poverty, addressing climate change, and improving the healthcare system. We've put out our proposal for a basic income that's a massive tax shift of $1.58 billion, but what it means is that it's going to drastically cut poverty rates in this province by about 48%, the depth of poverty by about a third. So I don't think you can understate the impact that addressing poverty would have in terms of the ripple effects through our healthcare system, through our CFS system, through our justice system. And there's a reality, unfortunately, of the historical legacy of the systematic genocide that this country has imposed upon Indigenous peoples means that they're unfortunately disproportionately affected by poverty. I know I only have a minute left, so I won't be able to get to everything, but we want to take some of our direction from the calls to actions. I highlight the basic income already, and that was actually a guaranteed livable income was a suggestion of the Murdered Indigenous Women's and Girls Inquiry. Also worth highlighting that they called for restoring rural bus service, and I think that's key. I wrote a letter to the Minister of Transportation when Greyhound pulled out, urging them to have a conference to sit down and work with First Nations. This is an example of partnership of how we can restore it. It can be a means of economic development for First Nations, and the reality is the running rate system wasn't working, and now that we're allowing private companies in, we're going to have service from Winnipeg to Thompson, but what about from Thompson to Split Lake? What about we got service from Winnipeg to Dauphin? What about Dauphin to Pine Creek? That's why if we had partnered with our First Nations, it would have made things more effective. And lastly, thank AMC for hosting this and choosing green wristbands.
Thank you, James Bedham. Now we'll have Dave Wheeler. Dave Wheeler, why should First Nations voters support you?
Support my party. I don't
Support
have a
your
party.
party.
Yeah, no, I don't have a party. And I think that's actually one of the biggest advantages that I have going into this, because I'm not part of a party. I'm not going to sit here and tell you what you need. I'm not going to sit here and tell you what I'm going to do. The best thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to sit here and I'm going to listen. I'm going to listen. And I'm going to represent those thoughts in the legislative building. Because 200 years ago, it was mentioned in my bio, as my new Twitter friend Beardy mentioned, it was mentioned in my Twitter bio that I'm a direct descendant of Miles MacDonnell, and that's why I wear this Scottish tie with pride that was cut from my mother's kilt when I was a little boy. And he brought the first group of European settlers to the Red River Colony. And the thing that he did is he listened. And he listened. And the only way to survive back in those days was to listen. And that's the only reason why they were able to survive. And we've forgotten about that. If you drive over the Chief Peguis Bridge, you drive over the Chief Peguis Bridge, and there's a lot of Scottish names that are along that Chief Peguis Bridge, because it was a great partnership. And somewhere along the way, we lost that. We lost that with a lot of BS that goes on in the legislative building, because not enough people are listening. I want to go and I want to listen. I want to be a true representative. I don't want to be part of a party that's going to toe a line and say, we're going to do this, and if you're not happy with it, so what? This is the best thing for the party because we feel it's the best thing for you. I want to go in and listen. I want to go in and listen. I don't want to represent, because Manitobans is made up of a lot of different people, everybody. And not taking care of our water, dumping raw sewage like we did last week for 12 hours straight that flows north into our rivers and our lakes. That's not good for anybody, nobody. And we need to start listening to each other. We need to start listening to ourselves. And we need to figure out what's best for all of us. And I want to be a true representative, and I want to listen. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave Wheeler. Now I'd like to move into the Q&A portion of this evening. We will open up the floor to the community to ask questions to the political party leaders. I ask only that you keep it Indigenous related and respectful. So if you have a question, just raise your hand with your microphone, and I'll send a microphone to you. The floor is now yours. I have a question here. Who's got the mic? We'll go. The guy with the black hat, the hand.
Yes, my two-part question is to the 5 panel guests that are hopefully going to give us the right answer the best way they can. I'm an elder from the north of Thompson, and the issues that I have is in regards to health care, transportation. There's no mechanism in place when an elder comes from the north to Winnipeg to attend for their medical. There's no coordination of services from the health centers, and we know that the Pallister government has cut the health authorities up north, amalgamated 3 to form 1. And who suffers? First Nations people, because the services are not there. And that has to change, because lives are being lost because of the services that were there before, not there anymore. And the other part is the matter of families with addiction. We see so many of our First Nations people battling their addictions of alcohol, drugs, meth, cocaine. What is your government going to do, if elected, to battle those with those fundings that may be possible from the federal government with the provincial? You have to start working together with the resources out there. Okay? Thank you.
All right, I'll go first. As far as the addictions problem, it's brutal. It's brutal. It affects so many people. It not only affects the user, it affects the families, it affects friends. And there's a lot of research I've been doing over the years, and I think a lot of people in this room can appreciate this. It really comes down to a natural solution. Instead of putting somebody in a care facility for upwards of 2 years and trying to grind it out of them, with the success rate being very, very low. There's 2 natural substances that grow in our world, and they're called ibogaine and ayahuasca. And they're a very radical drug. They're a very psychedelic drug. But the success rate is upwards of 75% of people who have never gone back to doing drugs after doing it. The fact that anybody in government has not looked at this as a viable option baffles me. We will sit there and we'll take an opioid addict and we'll give him more opioids. We'll put him in the hospital and we'll keep pumping him full of opioids, trying to get rid of, we'll tail it off slowly, we'll take a little time. It'll take a little while, but we'll keep him in the hospital for a while. It's a radical problem. We need a radical solution. Why we're not looking at every single option, including ayahuasca and ibogaine, is baffling to me. If we want to fix it, let's try everything we possibly can instead of going through the usual things that we've done all the time that have failed us over and over and over again. As far as your question, as far as transportation, the easy answer is, let's get transportation there. Let's just do it. I don't understand why we have to wait so long and say, well, maybe we'll do this and maybe by next election. Let's just do it. If we have people up there that need to get care, let's get them care. I know it sounds like a really easy answer. Yeah, but how? Well, let's just do it. Let's get somebody there. Let's call somebody, say, hey, this person needs to get there. Let's get them there. It's really not that hard. I think we can do it. Again, by listening and figuring it out. I don't think we need to sit there and complain over and over and over and over and over to people and say, this isn't working. Let's just do it. Let's just stop fighting about it and get it done, because people need help and we're not doing it.
Thank you. Does any other provincial candidate have anything else to add?
Yeah, for sure. So the issue of transportation is very serious. You know, when Mr. Donkey died on the bus coming down to Winnipeg for his medical appointment, that was a tragedy, and it should never have happened. And we worked with the family to ask for an inquest to be called, but more importantly, we asked that the Northern Patient Transportation Program be fixed and all the funding conditions that they've been putting on there, that those be removed. Because again, this is a life or death issue. And what have we seen in the time since? We've seen it go in the opposite direction. Privatization of LifeFlight. And we know that LifeFlight serves many communities across the province, including Dauphin and Brandon and even Winnipeg if you're a pediatric cardiac patient. But it also does serve many Northern First Nations. And so the LifeFlight issue does need to be rectified. LifeFlight should be kept as a public service because only a public service can guarantee that those planes will fly through a blizzard, will fly throughout the year, and will provide the necessary medical transportation. So we want to fix those things. But there's another issue lurking behind the issue of transportation. In the Island Lake region alone, they spend close to $80 million annually in various forms of medical transportation. That's money that could be providing direct health care rather than just a ride to health care. So one of the things we will be committing to is to locating more healthcare services in the north and on First Nations so that people can get good quality healthcare close to home. We won't be able to do everything, but if we bring some primary care and we bring some good healthcare closer to home, we'll be able to cut out a whole lot of the transportation issues that are being created. And what's underlying that commitment is a realization that the provincial government should not end at the boundary of the reserve. And that's something that will change.
Thank you.
When we're talking about addictions, this is a super important issue. I've been lucky in my own life to be given a second chance and to bounce back from struggling addictions. And I'd like to think that I've made my family and my community proud for all the support that they invested me in the earlier years. And right now, I have a adopted brother who is on a completely different path. You know, we're essentially similar upbringing, similar background, and he's out there living the life right now. And so I want to be able to give to everyone who's in a situation like we were in the past the opportunity to make good on their own second chance. It's not going to happen by ignoring the issue, as we've seen, as it becomes a crisis proportion. We know that Mr. Pallister is not capable of dealing with the addiction issue seriously because he talks about it like a choice. He says these people have made a choice. Addictions is not a choice. Addictions are a disease, and they need to be treated as such with mental health and healthcare. And so we will, within the first 100 days of forming government, we will bring more detox, more harm reduction, and more resources to fight the addictions crises on the front line, both here, in Brandon, and in other hotspots around the province like Swan River, as another example.
Would you look into ibogaine and ayahuasca?
At the same time, there's another factor that we need to focus on, which is the root causes of addiction. So we're going to take the immediate action within 100 days. The root causes, however, what they're telling me, the experts say, is that the root cause of addiction is unresolved trauma. And when you look at the Indigenous community and you see that you have families that have been impacted by the intergenerational impacts of residential schools, that have been impacted by the 60s scoop, that have been impacted by the CFS system today, and there's other form of addiction and trauma being visited on our families. We know that trauma is the root cause of addiction. And so we will also set about to deal with a prevention approach to addiction as well. Preventing trauma by reforming the CFS system, preventing trauma by keeping kids together, preventing trauma by giving more mental health resources in the community so people can be healthy earlier in life and hopefully avoid so many of these problems that they see later on with addictions.
I'd like to remind the party candidates to be mindful of their microphone time for the other provincial candidates as well, and to keep the questions short as well. So we would like, I'm going to give an opportunity for the other candidates to address that, and then we'll move on to the next question. Once again, let's keep the comments respectful to a short time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sure. A large part of our the reason why we have come up with our health plan the way we have is because of what I saw in the north. Our the main thing we want to do is make sure that people can get the care they need closer to home. That partly works, that's partly true in Winnipeg with the closures of ERs, but the transportation costs in Thompson, in the PA, you name it, are unbelievable, and it's putting people's lives at risk. The fact is, one of the reasons, the fact is that there is not enough care, is that, and there have been hospital closures, rural hospital closures for a long time in Manitoba, for many years before the PCs even started doing it. But the other is that there are extremely successful models for providing better care. There's integrated care models, and one of them is the NUCA model, which has been used by OCN. It was originally developed for First Nations in Alaska. It's extremely successful because it treats the patient first, it's culturally sensitive, and in the first 6 months of applying it, and this is in an area where people, the rates of diabetes are 20 times the national average, they saved $700,000 in transportation costs, and they reduced emergency visits, they reduced hospitalizations, and they reduced amputations because they're helping keep people healthier, but they're also teaching people how to take care of themselves, and it's an incredibly important thing we have to do. The other is that across the north, there are women who have either can't get access to prenatal care, or they're flown down from the north to and have to sit around. They're in their eighth month of pregnancy and have to sit in a hotel room in Winnipeg, waiting before they have to have a baby, and that's not acceptable. We should also be providing much better maternal care. In terms of addictions, we've set out a very specific plan, but the number one thing we have to start doing is prevention. I was up in St. Teresa Point, and there were posters all over the wall there at the local mall because kids had to make their own posters warning about the dangers of meth because it hadn't been done. We have to focus on prevention to stop people from ever using it in the first place, but we also need jobs programs and other programs across the province to divert people away from gangs and keep them from being preyed on by predators. So we do have a very detailed plan about it, but one of the most important things is actually that people have to have free access to addictions treatment, and it has to be seamless. There are too many gaps so that people end up checking into care, they get 3 weeks, they're out, and then when what they need is to go smoothly to transitional housing, and then beyond that to more support. We do need to be, we have to take better care of people, and today we also announced that we would provide mental health supports across the province for free psychological counseling, as well as the creation of a special trauma center in Manitoba. So these are all things that need to be done, but one of the most important things is that we need to provide care closer to where people live so you don't have to spend so much time traveling, so much time away from your family and from your community.
Thank you. Does Eileen Clark have a response?
Well, thank you very much, and I think you'll find my answers somewhat differ from the other candidates up here. The one thing I've learned most in the past 3 years, when you're opposition, you can have lots of ideas and they're all good. I'm not saying they're not good, but when you actually have to deliver what you're saying you're going to deliver, it's quite different. Because as a government, we don't just deal with healthcare and education and CFS, we deal with it all. That's our job. And I really appreciate the elder asking this question. And there's a component here that he asked, just a small portion of it, but it is a very significant part of healthcare. Not just healthcare for First Nations, but many other issues as well. And it's about relationships. And it's the relationship between the federal government, the provincial government, and the First Nations. And that's really significant because we all have different roles to play. Where we've run into significant problems is, and I will relate a couple that I've dealt with the past couple of years, where the federal government decides, after a lot of requests, to build a hospital in a northern First Nations. This is really good news. But when it's announced and the chief isn't aware that it's actually coming, it causes disruption and it causes some hardships. What kind of hardships does it cause? The federal government builds the building. They provide the funding for the actual hospital, or another case on the eastern side of the province where they built a really beautiful medical center. Excellent choices. However, they do not provide funding for staff, There's no staff provided from the federal level. They do not supply any supplies for a hospital, and in most cases, they don't supply the equipment. So how is a hospital supposed to function? It's just a building. So this is different components, and this is why we have to improve relationships between the federal government, the provincial government, and our First Nations leadership. And we've had many discussions, chiefs and councils and myself, on how we can improve those relationships. How do we improve communication so that what is achieved in the best way possible, so that the service delivered is the best possible. You're absolutely right. Healthcare deficit in this province is out of control, and that's why, as a government, we have taken steps. We were spending more in the province of Manitoba per capita than any other province in all of Canada, but the results for our healthcare were number 10. We were delivering the worst results. That's very clear. We have a problem. So we've been trying to correct that problem, and in most cases, the changes that have been made are positive. People do not like change. That's a given. We know that people don't necessarily accept change easily. But you heard this week that there's 500 positions of nurses gone. That is not true. There are 300 positions available for nurses if they want them. They're there. That's a fact, and we have to deal with the facts. We want health care equitably for all Manitobans, regardless of where you live. And we will strive towards that. We have a long ways to go for all of Manitobans. There's no doubt about it. And the same with addictions. Are we dealing with a crisis? Absolutely we are. Nobody denies that. And we have to work on it collaboratively. It's something that affects every one of us, and we are all a part of it. Chiefs and councils acknowledge this, and they acknowledge that we need to work in stronger partnerships, and our party looks very forward to that.
Thank you. We're going to move on to another question now.
Sorry, I didn't get a chance
Oh,
to
you didn't
respond. I've been waiting all along. I will do my best to stay within the 2 minutes, but no, the last three speakers didn't. Really quickly, transportation, we need to recognize that mass transportation is part of our road networks. We need to see it as an extension of the road and conceive it that way, because it is important. It's important about accessibility for not just Indigenous people, but all people in our society. In terms of your comment about the medical transportation, as I already noted, the previous NDP government, to keep Greyhound here, previously offered money, basically subsidized Greyhound, and part of the reason was the cross-subsidization of the running rights. I think what would have been wiser, and this government chose not to give money to Greyhound, would have been to take that same amount of funding and work with First Nations to provide that funding to create a true partnership. The reason I say that is because some of the First Nations Medivans were filling a transportation need that Greyhound wasn't. They were basically eating into their market share. Good on First Nations. Let's support and work with First Nations to create a transportation network that's actually going to be seamless across the entire province. I already sort of addressed how, if we're going to go to the private market, only certain routes, only profitable routes are going to get serviced, mainly our major routes, Winnipeg to Thompson, Winnipeg to Brandon, Dauphin, etc. Beyond that, I do want to second what Wob said in terms of the cost of flights for a lot of healthcare and First Nations. As a lawyer, I've been lucky enough to work on some cases, and I'm very convinced that, quite frankly, the way we provide healthcare services, particularly in northern Manitoba with nursing stations, is contrary to Section 36 of the Constitution, which requires reasonably equitable access to services across Canada. And I'd like to see this provincial government push forward a court case like that rather than a court case challenging the carbon tax. With respect to addictions, I do want to agree with Mr. Kineo that we do have to look at preventative. We do have to recognize the impact of trauma. I certainly saw that working with a number of residential school survivors as a lawyer. So, you know, addictions is something where we have to realize that this is ultimately a health concern, and we need to help people when they're in need of help. And the problem is right now that there's delays, that you might even be able to get a referral for addiction, but then you need to come up with the $10 or $30 for a doctor's note. Well, if you're struggling with addiction, unfortunately, you might be thinking other places with that $10 or $20. You might have to wait a week or two. Any kind of friction for someone struggling with addiction when they're ready to own up to their addiction and deal with it is a problem. And we need to realize that that has to instantly be dealt with. I addressed it quickly, but our basic income policy also would have an impact. I'm not saying addiction doesn't cut across socioeconomic classes. It certainly does, but there are clear linkages with poverty, and we have to keep that in mind too. I'd love to go on for another minute or two, but I'm going to try to respect the clock because I'm already 45 seconds over. Thank you.
I'd like to thank all the provincial party leaders for answering that question, and I'd like to remind the provincial party leaders to stay within the 2 minutes. We're going to have more questions. We'll have fellow in the black there, please. Thank you.
Okay. Buju niga ni benesi indigenous cause makwan indudem. Within the past few years, we've seen an increasing amount of wildfires throughout this province, wildfires that have caused entire communities to evacuate and causing our elders and young children not only to leave their homes behind, but also to sleep on cots in buildings like this and the Leela Soccer Complex. What will you guys do to not only prevent wildfires in our province, but also to ensure that whenever a First Nations community is evacuated, that they do not have to sleep on hard cots in the RBC Convention Center?
We will start with Wheeler and go to the right.
First off, I mean, a lot of these wildfires, unfortunately, are natural occurring wildfires. A lot of them are man-made, and those are brutal, absolutely brutal, regardless the fires are happening. To try and stop a lot of the natural ones, I mean, you know, shy of putting up a giant shield, there's not much. But what we can do is we can get better training in these areas for volunteer firefighters. I live in a rural community, and we have a fantastic volunteer firefighting department. I think we need to have the resources in all these areas that are affected year after year after year. I grew up in Fort McMurray. We had wildfires every single year. A few years ago when those wildfires happened in Fort McMurray, I was getting text messages on my phone saying, hey, the fires are going up in Fort McMurray. And I said, yeah, it happens every year. But when it gets serious, where it starts threatening life, and over 85,000 people were evacuated, I don't disagree with you. It's a major issue. I think prevention is, not preventing the fires, but having the resources and the training to take care of the fires and making sure that lives are being spared, first and foremost. If that's not capable, then making sure that we have appropriate places to go. I know when the wildfires happened in Fort McMurray, people were going north, they were going south. There's only one way in, one way out of Fort McMurray to head south. And the other option was to head up north to Fort McKay, Fort Chipewyan, and a lot of the reserves up there, and they welcomed them with open arms. I would like to see, and again, this is just an idea. I've got a lot of ideas. I'm here to listen, but I got a lot of ideas. Getting a program together of people who are saying, hey, if these places get evacuated, I would be willing to take 4 people at my house. I'd be willing to take a family at my house, a family of 4, a family of 5. Instead of putting people in places like this, let's open up our doors. We all live in the same province. The fires affect all of us. Let's start taking accountability and start taking care of each other by opening up our doors to these people that are affected by these instead of putting them in convention centers and schools and hotels for year after year after year. We got to start taking care of each other.
Thank you. We'll have James Bedham.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for the question, and I think it is a tough one. One thing I just want to highlight is the linkage of climate change and the risk of increasing fires, because I think that's important for us to recognize, and that's why, you know, we need to address climate change and get off of fossil fuels as fast as possible. Obviously, we need to work with communities on any prevention and local fire work that can be done. It is going to get challenging when you're going to have a last-minute evacuation. We certainly need to find more suitable accommodations, but the hard thing in emergent situations, to be fair, is that no one necessarily expects them or knows when they're coming. But I think that we should be able to find more suitable accommodations than housing a bunch of people in a convention center or something like that. And it's surprising that we aren't able to find enough within our existing hotel or housing stock. But I mean, that's something that I think we would look at trying to do differently. But I think really what that starts with is talking to the First Nations and trying to work with them, because I think, the First Nation governments will know what their people will need and will be the ones that should be taking the directions. And I don't know if that's, what happened in the last time. It was, you're staying here, not where can we put you up? How can we make this work? So it's an approach of more dialogue, I think, is what's most needed. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we'll have Wab Canoe.
So first of all, I would like to shout out the members of Bear Clan. I see a couple of them in the back row. I don't know if James is still here too, but when the evacuees were here at the convention center, I visited with James and the other Bear Clan members who are keeping the people safe here, because I know it was very chaotic the first night that they arrived, and a lot of safety concerns, but Bear Clan did a great job. And so we got to shout them out for all the good work that they do, both with the wildfire evacuees, but also just in the community generally. And, I like to help out where I can. When they had the powwow at the Garden City soccer complex for the evacuees, I danced there, put on my regalia. I think you may have been working with Judy Klassen at the time, and we saw you both there. So I know Judy does a lot of good work there as well. So I think that's where Manitobans really come together. We can pool resources to help, but also to entertain and to welcome and to comfort. I guess an easy commitment I would make is I'll keep my cell phone on during this situation. It was a bit of a mess when Little Grand was evacuated, and there's a bit of a blame game going on between the province and the First Nation, but open communication is an easy answer to that problem. We do need to solve climate change because climate change is making wildfires more frequent, and we know that many First Nations will be more affected if there are more frequent fires. So we definitely need to get a handle on the climate change issue. And, there's a lot of good firefighting teams around the province, so let's make sure that they have the training necessary to respond. And when there's a firefighting competition going on, let's maybe put some resources so that they can be proud, but also do a great job in keeping communities safe right across Manitoba.
Thank you. We'll now have Eileen Clark.
Thank you. And again, a really good question, because we have experienced some pretty extreme fires just a couple of years ago. And in that particular instance, we had more than one community affected. So we were dealing with a lot of people. And I think just for clarity, I will again talk about the necessity for collaboration between all levels of governments with these First Nations communities, because the Indigenous Services Canada employs Red Cross to handle their emergency situations, whereas in Manitoba we have an emergency measures organization. But I have to say, in the last couple of years, the collaboration between those two groups has improved dramatically. And they are spending a lot more time and effort ensuring that they're all on the same page and working towards the same goals and ensuring these people. And I think the one thing that we all learned the very hard way was indeed safety of these people when they're in this community, and that that they are taken care of in a very specific way so that there is no harm comes to them while they're here. So again, collaboration is utmost. And Wob talks about keeping his phone on. My phone is on 24/7. I have most of the chiefs have my direct number. I keep in contact with them every single day. I call them. They do not have to call me. I call them to ensure that they're okay and that their needs are met, and if they need anything done on their behalf from our province. So collaboration, communication, extremely important.
Thank you. We'll now open up more questions. I'm sorry.
It's okay. I'm so quiet.
I forgot. My list here is, Dougal Lamont.
Oh, thank you. This is a huge problem across the north. Because of climate change, there are more likely to be more forest fires. We have to have emergency plans in place in all these communities. But the other is that sometimes the infrastructure just isn't there. With the evacuation that happened in St. Teresa Point, people had to pile into boats and cross a lake in order to get to the one airstrip that they needed to get out. There is an airstrip that's been promised there for over 50 years that should get built. We can also pay people in local communities to improve management of the forest, to cut fire breaks, to protect communities, to prevent forest fires from having this kind of devastating effect. But the other is that there would just have to be emergency plans in place. There have been huge communication problems, and sometimes it's hard to even get a hold of people in these communities because things like cell service and other communications just aren't there. There have been ongoing, long-standing problems with the way the province communicates. Unfortunately, the province decided to sell off a lot of airplanes. They've sold off water bombers. They've sold off other emergency aircraft. And ultimately, they've also privatized Life Flight. These are all things that I don't think are in the public interest, and certainly not in First Nations interest. But the fundamental thing is that there has to be better coordination, and there need to be plans in place, because I honestly don't know. The fact that When these fires happened, there wasn't a plan. There was a bit of a panic. There's no way 1,000 people should have been staying here when there were new mothers, people who just had operations and no showers in the entire building. So we need to have a plan because that's what the Red Cross and emergency measures is supposed to be ready for.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We had a question from somebody in the back with wearing the red shirt.
Hi there. I just wanted to point out that some of the information, the information that we get, we need to be able to, as people who are listening, we need to be able to listen to it and sort of fact check for ourselves. So I want to point out that the Conservative candidate mentioned about hospitals not receiving any federal funding. Well, that there is provincial and federal funding for health care. For instance, one of the problems we've had recently is that the federal government put money into the meth crisis, if you recall hearing this on the news, and there was a delay at the provincial level to get that money put out. So I guess I just wanted to point out that that wasn't an accurate statement, and one of the things that we need to do as listeners is to think about the information that we're getting. So I wonder if you wanted to comment on that, the Conservative candidate, about the meth crisis funding. Specifically, what I'm talking about is the Conservatives said that they would address the issue with 4 new clinics. One of the clinics in Winnipeg opened up with 1 2-hour window a week to deal with the crisis. So, yeah, if you can address that, and maybe you can address this aspect of federal provincial funding for hospitals.
Sure.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. I don't think you quite understood when I talked about funding for hospitals built on reserve. I indicated that that was a federal initiative. They build the hospitals. And that's ongoing as we speak. There's hospitals being built in northern Manitoba. I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
If they're on a reserve, the feds fund the running of them.
No, actually, the provincial government funds the staffing. We fund the staff and the supplies and those types of things. It is a joint effort. Pardon me?
Depends on the service.
Yeah. So, I mean, that is discrepancy, but that, to my knowledge, that is the way that, because we were to fund and we had not budgeted for new hospitals because we weren't aware of it. So that's the information through the health minister. I will address the meth crisis to the best of my knowledge, but it is not directly in my files. It comes through justice in our government. So I don't have all the information that you might want to get, but there is 4 RAM clinics, as you indicated, and I don't know what capacity they're at now, but it's taken time to get them going. There's also been a task force that's set up with the federal government, the provincial government, the police forces, etc., to work on the meth crisis, and I know they've come up with some initiatives, and I think you'll probably be hearing a lot more about that. And you're right, nothing is happening fast enough because this meth crisis is jumping ahead so rapidly, so I certainly don't dispute that at all.
Thank you.
Isn't it true that your government highlighted alcohol over meth numerous times? It was sort of highlighted that you thought alcohol was a bigger deal than meth. I remember the health minister making a comment on that. I can find the Free Press article for you.
Not to my knowledge, but I don't know what you read.
Okay, we will continue with questions now. We have a questioner with the gray shirt in the middle here towards the aisle.
I just wanted to know what you guys plan to do about education, especially in the northern communities, and special education, because a lot of our children are being diagnosed with FASD. Autism is on the rise, as well as ADHD. There's a lack of resources in the northern communities, especially, and even here, they're forced to come off reserve to the city just so that they could get an education. What are you guys going to do to address these concerns?
We will start with Dougal Lamont and come to the left.
One of the things we want to, one of the things we want to make sure of is that we have equitable funding for schools on reserve. There are some programs. Wayway Capo has a program, an agreement with a nearby school division to make sure that funding is on par, because for so many years the funding for First Nations students was a fraction of what it was for students who off reserve. So we want to make sure we have equitable funding. The other is that when you talk about kids who have learning disabilities of any kind, it's often a struggle to get them assessed. So one of the things that we announced today was that we would cover under Medicare, we would cover psychological assessments for free to make sure kids can get assessed right away, so that they can get the special treatment they need. And we're willing to invest further in that to make sure it happens. It's a huge challenge, especially recognizing what's all the extra challenges that happen with the North. But part of that is we have to take an equitable funding approach. We have to say, look, the fact is, if it costs more money up there, we have to accept that, and we have to fund it properly to make sure that that everybody has the same access to the same education and everybody gets a chance.
Thank you. And again, a very good point. Visiting the Northern First Nations, and of course their challenges are so much greater than they are in the southern part of the province. But I think the thing that I have found most encouraging the past year is the communities that I go into that are having Jordan's Principle clinics right within their wellness center or their health center. And the work that they're doing, I've spent a considerable amount of time with the caregivers that they have there and the specialists that they bring in weekly to work with children. You talked about autism, and there's many other physical and emotional and mental issues that they're dealing with. And it's really overwhelming, and they're so encouraged by the work that's happening through Jordan's Principle clinics, and I hope that we see this continue throughout more of our First Nations communities. But even in constituencies such as myself, when we go just a little bit north in my constituency in the southern part of the province, getting Indigenous children to school it's a problem. It's hard. There's a lot of different challenges that they have that other children just don't experience. And talking to the school boards and talking to the teachers, and they explain what it takes to get those children to school. But you know what? Those dedicated teachers, they're doing it. They take their own personal time, and they do so much to ensure that all children get to school, that they're nourished when they're there. So big shout out to the teachers that put in that extra time and that extra bit of caregiving for the kids and ensure that they get proper nutrition and that they're safe and that they're clothed properly. So much work to do in the education system throughout our province, and that's why we have a review going on right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Wab Kadu.
I was in Dauphin about 2 months ago, and I was meeting with a group of parents from the region whose children have exceptional needs. And after we were done meeting, one of the moms just pulled me aside, and she just very emotional, almost to the point of being distraught. She said, "Listen, Wab, I don't want the world, I don't want the government to do everything. I just want you to give my kid a fighting chance." And that's what this issue is about. There are increasing rates of needs, but these are exceptional kids. These are great kids, good hearts, good spirits, funny kids, right? And sometimes we got to recognize sometimes exceptional kids have exceptional needs. Now, some of the things that have been aggravating the situation for these parents are some of the cuts that have been happening to provincial programs. For instance, a parent driving a kid to an appointment in the city gets $2.85 travel per diem for breakfast, right? So you get about $3 for breakfast to go to an appointment for your child with special needs. And they're aggravated. And I was speaking to one of their former caseworkers, and she actually left the province and went to go work for Jordan's Principle for West Region because she felt like she could make a bigger difference there. So yeah, Jordan's Principle is doing some good, but we also need the provincial resources to be improved. That's why in the education system, we want to create smaller class sizes so kids can get more one-on-one time with the teacher, because that's when the real learning happens. But we also want to ensure that there's more EAs in the classroom to support those kids with the exceptional needs. But having more EAs, it also benefits all the other kids in the class, because then they know that they're still getting that one-on-one time with the teacher. But again, we want to make these moves, address mental health issues, deal with special needs, exceptional needs, because every single kid in Manitoba deserves a fighting chance.
We'll now have James Bedham.
So thank you for the question, and without a doubt we need specific policies and programs in place to support Indigenous students. So we need, and that's sort of looking at a culturally appropriate, it may be language programs, it may be on-the-land learning, it may be breakfast support programs. We also need to look at ways of better supporting local needs in our school division. So this is just an example for me as a rural child, but I think there'd be similar examples for First Nation communities. Because the way I was bused and I got bused to a larger high school, there was 20 minutes every day of the kids sitting around, and our school wanted to basically have every 20th day off and utilize that 20 minutes of class teaching time. Unfortunately, that wasn't allowed because the province had a policy against that. So it's allowing a little bit more autonomy because people in their local areas know what needs may be there in terms of travel arrangements, etc. We need to cut down the assessment times for students with autism or FASD, something the Manitoba Teachers Society has called for and we support. And you know, it really is about trying to ensure that we are supporting our kids. And the last thing I just want to highlight is, and it's a common one and one that I don't know that any of us at this table can necessarily fix as potential premiers of Manitoba, and that's the jurisdictional issues that we have in our Constitution, that whether it's healthcare, whether it's education, and the funding gaps that create challenges for First Nations. So that's something that I think we do need to do, but to be blunt and honest, it's not something that could be done by one premier alone. It's something that would have to be done on a national level vis-a-vis the constitutional amending formula. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we have Dave Wheeler.
Yeah, listen, it's tough for me to kind of answer large-scale questions like this because I'm just running as an independent in a boundary of about 22,000 people as MLA. So, but I plan on being premier one day, so I'm going to answer it like I plan on being premier one day. One of the... Oh, really? Oh, good. Well, I give you a lot of credit for homeschooling. My wife and I have talked about it. Man, what a workload. What a burden to take that on. And good for you. Congratulations. That's amazing. I wish more parents were like you and were willing to take on that burden because it definitely is hands-on. And you know that your kid's getting the best care possible. With that, not everyone's able to do that, right? We're able to segregate children into different grades. We're able to segregate children into different schools as far as, you know, private school or public school or Catholic school. I know Catholic school can be a naughty word, especially around a crowd like this, but we have no problem saying, okay, you're going to go here, you're going to go here. But we've always had a problem with taking children with autism or FAS or difficulties in learning, and we're just trying to force them through the exact same system. And I don't think that fits. We have more than enough infrastructure to create programs because let's not lie, there is a growing number of children that are having FAS and having autism. There's enough of them that we can create schools to have specified learning for these children and to take off some of that burden from you and to take off some of the burden from people who are having to struggle with this on a daily basis and not knowing what to do. We have specialized teachers. We have teachers that are going through school right now to deal with this specifically. And I think we need to start utilizing that and setting up infrastructure in places like West St. Paul, in places like the North End, in places like St. Norbert, wherever we see issues arising. And if we need to bus somebody from St. Norbert up to West St. Paul to get that education, we should do that, without a doubt. Thanks for the question.
Thank you. At this time, we have time for only one or two more questions. The questions would not be able to, at this point, with the short amount of time, be answered by all the party candidates. So if you have a question directed at a party candidate, feel free to ask that. If not, I will field it. So any other questions? The lady in red, white in the middle there.
You have to hold it? Yeah. Okay, hi. I'm from Tadula Lake, Manitoba. And I keep hearing about that there are so many people out there who are doing drugs such as opiates and cocaine. I don't know how these drugs are getting past the gates and onto the plane. Do you think that there could be greater measures so that these drugs don't get past the gates and onto those small airplanes? I know that Air Canada, their flight security is to the max, but not the small planes. And our people, our children are suffering.
Does any party candidate want to answer that question? Dougal.
So one of the things that we've suggested is creating a Manitoba police service that would work together with First Nations governments and existing First Nations police services to improve law enforcement, so that, and respecting First Nations sovereignty. The example that I have is from Island Lakes, is where there's the RCMP detachment is on an island on its own. There's 4 officers there, and there are 15,000 people in communities around there. And that band constables simply don't have the power or the authority to do the kind of searches that we need to do. So making sure that those searches are taking place and you have adequate security and trained security at airports especially is critical. And to give First Nations police forces especially the tools they need and the training they need to be able to have a greater presence on the ground to keep drugs out of communities. It's a huge problem.
Thank you. We also have the hands up for the speakers were Dougal, Lamar, Dougal, Bedham, and then Wab.
Sure. Try to be really quick here. I think bluntly speaking, yes. I mean, enhancing security, if we can try to keep drugs out of the community, makes sense. And certainly I've flown through Perimeter Airport and the smaller airports, and I recognize that the security is different. That said, I think we have to realize that's looking at the supply side and sort of the war on drugs, dealing with the supply side, dealing with the meth crisis out of justice, I think is a little bit problematic. You have to look at it as a health concern. You got to deal with the demand side, because we could put all the security we want in the world, and certainly that will help a little bit. But if there's still a demand, if people are still struggling with addictions, then people are going to find a way to get it in, and it's just going to be a matter of higher prices. So yes, but I think we have to also look at the broader picture and not just think supply side, but also think on the demand side in terms of helping users to deal with their addictions.
Yeah, so I just need 30 seconds on this one really quick. As smart as we get with our law enforcement, criminals...
Wab, can you next? And then
my apologies. Go ahead.
And then we could maybe attack you at 30 seconds.
Yeah, so the criminals are getting just as smart. I was reading a story last week on my podcast about some guys in Australia who were bringing meth in with those snow globes? They were hiding it in there, boxes upon boxes of them. They're finding new ways to get drugs in everywhere. I don't disagree when I think it comes down to education. I smoke weed, I like drinking, but I don't do opiates and I don't do cocaine because I was educated that stuff is terrible and it would ruin my life. And I teach my kids the same thing. So if they're bringing in a bunch of this stuff and it's just sitting there and no one's using it, I think that's one of the best defenses we possibly have. Thanks.
Thank you.
So I'll just jump in there briefly. I do think you could do some concrete steps to improve security in the airport, and you could catch some of the drugs that way. However, I do agree that it is about dealing with the addictions problem itself, because until you deal with the addictions problem, people are just going to keep finding another way, and if they can't find a way to bring in that substance, they'll use something else. And this is what the experts on harm reduction have been saying in the city, is that we're talking about a meth crisis right now, but really it's an addictions crisis. And it's the same addictions crisis we've been dealing with for decades. For a long time, maybe alcohol was the substance of choice, then maybe sniffing, then maybe coke, pills, opioids, meth, whatever. But the underlying issue is we have too many people in Manitoba who experience trauma in childhood and then never have a healthy way to deal with it later on in life, and then that becomes manifested as addiction. So let's deal with that root cause. For sure, we can take the immediate steps to catch people smuggling and stuff like that along the way, but let's deal with the underlying issue. Otherwise, we'll always just be putting a Band-Aid on this really serious problem.
Thank you. We now have time for one more question. There was a lady in blue in the middle left section that had a question.
Hello, my name is Charmaine.
And my question for the panel is, what does health equity mean to you, and how would your party enforce that in terms of the Indigenous population? I'm a front-line healthcare worker. I'm a nurse. I grew up in northern Manitoba. I had to leave home at age 13 to go to school. I lived in a residential school, not run by churches. We had social workers, but we had to leave home early because our communities could not keep us at home. And that was hard for us. That was hard for our parents. That happens today still in the North. I had to leave home to come down here to receive an education. And not everyone was as lucky as I was. There's still a lot of people, I go back home and they did not pursue education and that sort of thing because the options were very limited in the North. I'm a nurse. I'm a frontline worker. I worked in the hospital. I work in the community now. And let me tell you what a mess the Palliser government has made in healthcare. I'm a frontline worker, and I see what's happening, and I know what's happening out there, regardless of stats or what is said out there. People are suffering. The staff is suffering, burnout. Things need a change, and we need a huge change. Our Indigenous people need the support in healthcare. It's insane what's going on in there. I've seen it in the hospitals. I see it in the community. We're a long ways from the Indigenous people being treated fairly. Equities, what does it mean to you in terms of Indigenous people and healthcare? That is my first question. Secondly, someone touched on education. I have 2 boys. We're probably, on both sides, my husband and I, probably 2 generations back, that speak the language. We don't know it. Our parents were too ashamed to speak the language, so it wasn't passed on. Now I have my son here, Sage. He's in grade 7. And he said, "Mom, why do I have to learn French? Why is that mandatory in my school?" I said, "That's a good point." I said, "What if they offered a Anishinaabe, a Ojibwe, Cree?" I said, "Would you like to take that language instead?" He said, "Of course." That was the first thing he said was, of course, because he can relate to it. It's his culture and it's part of him. He said, "Mom, I took French, but I don't even really remember anything." There is no connect there. So we need to bring back our language because it's endangered and it's our culture. We need that. We need that to move forward. We need that for our children. We need the right, equitable health care for our Indigenous peoples. Racism is horrible in the healthcare system, let me tell you. I don't know how many times I have to stand up for Indigenous peoples out there. And I will continue to do that for the rest of my life, and I'll continue to stand for them until they're treated fairly. And I bet you that's generations away, but I mean, we've got to start now. And there's people who've started long before us. And I praise them. I praise all the elders. I praise everyone here. People who've come from far. People are here. I grew up in the North. A lot of people I connect with here are from all over Manitoba, in the hospitals, in the community. We're all here. We're not going away. And our children are here. And we're going to teach them to be strong. And they're going to move forward. And they're going to do a damn good job of making a great province and a great country. I promise you that.
I'd just like to take a moment and acknowledge this strong woman for having the courage to stand up and ask these questions. That's what this forum is about. Let's give her a round of applause, guys. This is the last question, and I would ask the candidates to keep it within a minute, and we'll start with Dave, and we'll go left.
All right. Listen, I would love to see you sitting up here in 4 years from now. I would love to see you. No, you're good at it, girl. Cute, you're good at it. And when you're passionate about something, I can tell. We need more voices like yours. My mother just cashed in her RN card after 42 years. 42 years of being an RN. Watched her walk home, say a lot of the same stuff you're saying on a regular basis. It's not inclusive to Manitoba. I wish it was a solved problem all over the place. Talking about the health, when I used to play hockey, they always say take care of your core. If you take care of your core, the rest will follow. You take care of your core, your arms are going to get stronger, your legs are going to get stronger. We need to start taking care of the core. The core of this country is its First Nations people, first and foremost. Talking about language, growing up in Fort McMurray after playing hockey, I'd go out and spend a lot of weekends out in the reserve, and I got a nickname out there, and it was Moon Yow. And somebody told me, it's like, oh, it means you howl at the moon. Years later, I found out what it really meant. But I picked up a lot of the language when I was out there, and I also learned French growing up as well, and I hated it, dude. Dude, I hated it. I wasn't a fan of it. But let me tell you, it opened up a lot of doors for me. Now that I speak 2 languages, I'm learning a 3rd one right now, and my kids are learning as well. So stick with that French as long as you can. Learn your home language. Learn as many languages as you can possibly get, man. It's going to open up a lot of doors for you. So good for you for sticking with it, and thank you for speaking your voice today. Thank you very much.
I want to also thank you for sharing and for your very powerful words. I think they were well received by everyone. I think equity in healthcare, I think I already touched upon this, means that people are getting reasonably equitable services across the country, and the reality is they aren't. The difference in healthcare, what you would probably get in southern Manitoba versus what you'd get in northern Manitoba, let alone the difference between a nursing station and a provincially run hospital, are drastic. So I think that's what equity is and what we need to push for on that. So you had so many good points here. I want to make sure I'm addressing them all. I thank you very much for being a healthcare worker that's standing with and for Indigenous people, because racism is sadly still part of our society, and we need people changing it, pushing at it to make that cultural change take place. You had also spoken, I wanted to highlight actually too, as a frontline worker, that quite frankly the Conservatives and Mr. Pallister broke their promise that they'd consult with frontline workers. What I'm hearing is, yeah, we might need to look at the system, but to ram it through so fast, so quickly, without talking to people isn't the way at moving the system forward, and that is a straight up broken promise. I wanted to highlight in terms of the nurses, what I'm hearing at least in Winnipeg is people have applied to the Winnipeg Regional Health Authority and have waited 6 months or more to even get a call back on a job. These are qualified RNs that could fill our nursing shortage, and for some reason not getting callbacks. I'm not sure if that's the same thing happening in the north. And lastly, you talked about education. We certainly need to preserve Indigenous languages. I think it's key that we start educating people in Indigenous languages, and I think we need to go beyond just Indigenous people. Here I am as a settler Canadian, with the work I've done, there's nothing more that I'd like to learn right now than Cree and Ojibwe. Learned a few words. I've also been called the Mooniash with the Shunias in the law firm there between my 2 business partners, and for those of you who know what that is. So, I get that. I learned a few words, but I'd like to learn a few, not just the dirty words. Can I put it that way?
Thank you. Kajunia Ketawe Nene. So, Miigwech Charmaine for speaking those very powerful words. For me, health equity is not just about being able to access the same services, it's about having the same outcomes as the general population. So what I mean by that, for everybody in the room here, is we will have health equity in Manitoba and Canada, not just when a First Nations person can show up and get the same prescription or medical coverage at a hospital as anyone else. We will have health equity when the rates of diabetes, the rates of heart disease, the rates of infant mortality are the same in our communities. And we know we have a long way to go until we close all those gaps. So we're going to fix healthcare. We're going to fix the mistakes that Mr. Pallister has made, but we're also going to modernize healthcare to focus on primary prevention, secondary prevention, tertiary prevention. Basically, we're going to keep people healthy, and we're going to work with communities to ensure the kids don't just have, Pepsi and poor diets around, but that they actually have an option to live a healthy lifestyle and to grow up to reach their full potential. When it comes to language, this is something that I am personally very passionate about. Yes, we need more bilingual and immersion programs. We need post-secondary programs to create immersion teachers for the next generation. But I also believe in the teachings of this Blackfoot guy who passed away a few years ago. His name was Daryl Kipp. And what he said with language is he said, don't wait for a grant, don't wait for a program, just do it right now, because we can't wait. And so on that front, there is actions that we can all take to strengthen the languages. And so one of the things that I do each and every day is I read to my 15-month-old son in Anishinaabe. And that's what I'm going to go do now. So miigwech ke bizindao yek and miigwech ke gi getok menoa.
Thank you, and I'm going to respond to you tonight as a mom and as a grandmother, because as a mom, my daughter's also a nurse. She's a frontlines nurse, and she worked in a larger center, and she knows exactly what you're talking about with racism. She experienced it there. The only difference is she was raised in a family that owns funeral homes, and we deal very much directly with First Nations people. She knew the people that were the patients in that particular hospital. She knew who they were. She knew by name, and she treated them respectfully, as she was taught to do in our home. It doesn't always happen. It doesn't happen. It doesn't matter if it's healthcare, out on the street, in services, and that does need to change. I agree with you wholeheartedly. I also want to address your son, and I'm so impressed that he's here tonight. I've had my 11-year-old grandson actually campaigning with me and learning what's going on in our world. And you know what? It's the kids we should be listening to and watching, because my grandsons played hockey this past winter with 2 Indigenous young guys. You know what? Color didn't matter to them. There was no differences. They both liked hockey. They liked playing their video games. We need to follow the lead of our children, because they don't build those barriers that have been created, and they're real, they exist. I totally acknowledge that. But, you know, it's our kids that's why I'm here. I'm here because I want a better world for my grandsons. And you're here tonight speaking because you want a better world for your boys. And that's what we have to keep in mind. You know, that we have to focus on what our future is and what we want for a future. And for me, and for so many of us, we want a good world for our kids to grow up in. And it doesn't matter whether it's healthcare, education, economic development. There is such a broad, we want opportunities for them. We want them to be healthy. We want them to be respected. And we want them to grow up to teach their children good values as well. So thank you for being here.
Thank you very much for that. That was very powerful. When you talk about health equity, I actually think about the terrible case of Brian Sinclair, who died in the ER at HSC, where he'd been for over a day, because people didn't realize he was sick as he was. And he was overlooked. And I think that's the worst, or one of the worst examples of what can happen, because we have systemic racism where people overlook people or treat them as second-class citizens or don't treat them as being full human beings. And that's been the legacy of what we've developed in this country, and that we have to fight and to overcome. And one of the most important things about equity is there's always a difference between equality and equity, right? Equality is the idea we treat everybody exactly the same, or you give them exactly the same thing, even though they're different. So equity is about recognizing that people are different and doing what we can to reduce that. And sometimes people will say, well, why are you giving special treatment to somebody? Well, it's not special treatment to right a wrong. That's justice. And equal treatment is not, or equitable treatment is not special treatment. It's fairness. So we have to commit to ourselves over and over again. Part of it in the healthcare system, we have to make sure we have adequate funding. I don't think there are any real justifications for the fact that healthcare funding has been frozen in this province for 3 years, even while the federal government continued to give more money. And frankly, I don't think a lot of the cuts that have happened were necessary at all, because the progressive conservative government decided to cut a lot of taxes rather than invest in the healthcare system. And that's a great frustration for me. But and I'll try not to go over long, but one of the important things when you talk about language and the right to educate your son and pass on your culture. It's incredibly important. That is what this province was founded on. Manitoba is unique. It is not like any other province in Canada because it was brought into Confederation by Louis Riel and by Indigenous leadership who said, we want to make sure that we have the right to educate our children in the religion and language of their choice. And it wasn't just limited to Catholic and French or English and Protestant. It's for everyone. And it still is today. It's in Manitoba's Constitution. So part of what we need to do is to live up to our founding principles and make sure that people can continue to do that. That you can carry that on and carry that on into the future. And it is possible to revitalize languages that we think are lost. It's happened all over the world and people have committed to it. So thank you very much. Thank you very much for your questions, and thank you very much to everyone for having us here tonight.
Okay, everyone, that is all for the questions for today. Thank you so much for the questions from the audience, and thank you to the party representatives for coming today. Let's give them a round of applause, guys. To show our appreciation for coming out today, we would like to present you with a gift on behalf of the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs. Thanks. How many enjoyed the march in a town hall and exercising your First Nation voice today? Before we conclude the evening, I want to invite each person here to come to our other events. I'm First Nation and I vote. There will be 2 more events, one focused on the next federal election and address Canada-wide concerns. The next event will take place in Winnipeg on September 11, 2019. It will be a similar format. We will begin with a march at 6 p.m. at the Indigenous Service Canada building. We will march back here to the Convention Centre again at 7 p.m. for another town hall style event. Once again, that's September 11 would be the next town hall event. There's also a town hall event for those up north in Thompson, Manitoba on September 19th. There is a march there at 6 p.m. and a town hall event at UCN to follow at 7 p.m. Please join our Facebook group called I'm Indigenous, I'm First Nations, and I Vote to help promote these events. Invite your friends, family, cousins to attend so that the next event is even louder and even more powerful. I'd like to end this evening with a prelude to one of those events and ask the federal candidate, Kyle Mason, to come and introduce themselves and talk about the importance of voting federally. Let's have a round of applause. So Kyle, I would like to ask you, how are you planning to address First Nations concerns if elected? As well, why is it important to attend the next town hall event?
Thank you very much. I apologize. I think we all thought this evening was over, but you all have to endure me for a couple minutes before we all call it an evening. But I want to thank AMC for the invite for coming out this evening, asking me to come out and represent the federal NDP, because everybody is well aware, obviously, after tonight that we have a provincial election coming up in September. But right after that, we have a federal election coming up on October 21st. So don't blame me personally, because that wasn't my choice. But yeah, as the federal NDP candidate running in Winnipeg North, is something I've been looking forward to doing. My family, my father's family comes from Peguis First Nation. My mother's family comes from Manigatogan, but I personally was raised in the north end of Winnipeg. And after 20 years of working in the nonprofit sector and having to beg and plead with governments of different stripes, I thought it was time to get involved and to make sure that a strong voice was represented in Winnipeg North. because when I become the MP for Winnipeg North and the federal election, I know that I will be able to bring a strong voice for the entire riding, but also for Indigenous peoples as a whole. The federal NDP, we have brought forward a strong list of candidates, a record number of Indigenous candidates across the country. But Leah Gazan and myself, Leah is running in Winnipeg Centre. I'm running right next door in Winnipeg North. I know that Leah and I will work together to make sure that all Indigenous people in Winnipeg and beyond have a strong voice in Ottawa. Because Leah is an amazing person, and I look forward to working with her in Ottawa. That being said, I've heard time and time again throughout Winnipeg North, which includes the entirety of the North End and beyond, that they always just assume that we Indigenous peoples are not going to get out and vote. And sometimes I've been hearing from our fellow Indigenous peoples that they're not going to bother to vote because they don't think it's important. But I want to tell you, nationally, studies have been done that if we as Indigenous peoples voted across the country in record number, we would decide the elections in 52 different ridings federally. And I want to tell you, if you want to make sure that Indigenous peoples go beyond protesting and demanding that our rights be respected, which is absolutely necessary and needs to continue, we need to make sure that we get everybody's attentions and get government's attention by making sure that they know that we get out and we vote. Because if we can decide the 52 ridings, they will pay attention to us, and that will go beyond protesting, and we'll actually have strong voices at the table. So I also want to encourage you to come out to the event on September the 11th. It's my birthday, so that'll be my birthday present to me. If you can come back out on that night, I'll say a personal thank you for that, because you've heard from the leaders and others this night about the very important provincial issues, but it's time we also start talking about our federal issues as well, because we have to do much better than Stephen Harper and Andrew Scheer, and we have to get past the pretty words but lack of action from Justin Trudeau. It is time that we start talking about real issues in a real way and have a real conversation. Thank you. Miigwech.
Thank you. That concludes our evening, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to be here. Here's his gift. The event will be posted on our YouTube channel and Facebook page. On behalf of the AMC, we would like to give you this gift. For you. Thank you. Gotcha. We'd encourage you to share all your photos and post using the hashtag IFNAIV, IFNAIV, meaning I'm First Nations and I'm vote. Also, Rachel, and in a striped shirt, will be taking anybody who would like to comment on tonight. It would be very helpful for events coming forward. I'm Ryan Beardy. It was a pleasure to be your MC this evening. Thank you very much. Enjoy your evening. Ekose. Miigwech.